She's trying to sign in, she said.
Okay. If she's having any trouble with the link, she can always come in through the website link and I can move her over.
Yeah.
Oh, here she is. Let's just pop her over.
Good morning.
Technical difficulties here.
Jack, no, not at all.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
I can't hear you guys.
Not at all. The
Okay.
audio.
How's that?
How about now?
I can hear you. Okay, I'm good.
Okay.
Sorry. I'm at my son's house with the boys and I'm all discombobulated this morning.
Okay, if you're ready, Barry, I can get you started on YouTube.
yeah, let's go.
Okay. Hang on one second. Okay, and you're good to go.
Okay, thank you. I call the meeting of the Southborough Personnel Board to order. First order of business is the approval of the minutes which have been circulated. Any changes, corrections, amendments to the minutes? Seeing none. Oh,
Hang on, I got two. So in the version in our packet, there's a circle on line 56. Is that someone?
That's a typo I noticed after I printed them,
Okay.
Jason, so I
Yeah.
made a note of that.
Okay, and then on line 21, I think we interchanged the use of the word clerk in vice chair throughout the minutes. I think technically clerk now, I know we're looking to change it.
yeah,
So just, we should be consistent there. Those are my two notes.
Thank you.
no, definitely should say clerk.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way. First, is there a motion to amend the minutes to reflect those changes?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, we have to do a roll call. Mr. Nixon,
Aye.
Mr. Malinowski,
Aye.
Ms. Jazinski,
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Now, is there a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
So
So
moved.
moved.
Second. Okay, Mr. Nixon,
Aye.
Mr. Malinowski,
Aye.
Ms. Jazinski,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. Minutes are approved. Dorian, why don't you mute your, much as I enjoy this pitter patter of little feet.
I'm
um,
enjoying my 6 hours of quiet, actually.
Okay, moving on to the expenditure ledger, there are no changes, no expenditures. So unless there are any questions about that, I think we can move on to the chair's report. Just a few items on the minutes. As many of you, not all of you know, the select board approved a policy on minutes which allows for the payment of $50 an hour for someone, for select committees to pay someone. Fortunately, we were included on that list. However, I think our preference should be not to spend that money if we don't have to. And in discussions with Mr. Purple and Ms. Hale, they have, at least for the time being, volunteered the services of their office, either through the person of Ms. Hale or Melanie, who works in their office, to do the minutes. And we'll sort of see how that goes, both from their perspective and from our perspective. And we can make a determination down the road if we feel we need to retain someone to do the minutes. Any comments from anyone on that?
I like the approach and completely agree with everything you said, Barry. The only thing I would caution is, while I think it's going to work perfectly fine, if it doesn't, the budget we submitted for next year does not include a minute taker. So we just need to be cognizant of that moving forward. But I'm hopeful it works, and therefore we don't need a budget.
Nope. Good point. We didn't think of a few things when we put together the budget. So hopefully we'll work through it. And we thank Mr. Purple and Ms. Hale for their generous cooperation on this. In your packet at page 6 is a draft of the Personnel Board submission for the annual report. It's very much a draft, and I thank Ms. Hale for taking the lead oar in putting that together. Welcome any comments, suggested changes to that either now, or you can communicate with me directly on that. Moving on, let's skip item 3. On item 4, the Rec Commission. This is just a heads up that the Rec Commission is going to be coming to our next meeting, I expect, with a proposal to increase the salary ranges for camp counselors. And this is because of the recent change in the state minimum wage. Now it's $14.50 an hour. Not that they are directly impacted by that, because camp counselors are exempted from the minimum wage, but their concern is that people who might otherwise have been interested in becoming camp counselors may find more lucrative opportunities elsewhere. They are gathering information about what other communities are doing, and we'll be presenting that, but I wanted to plant the seed with everyone. If there's any other information that you think would be relevant, that you'd like them to put together, please let me know so I can pass it along, so when they come, they have everything they need. Okay, moving on to the Assistant Town Administrator's report, Ms. Hale.
Thank you. as you'll note, there is no memo in your packet this month. We had hoped to be making an appointment this past week for our senior IT specialist, but that the negotiations were not successful. So we are back to square one with our senior IT specialist, Jay Montijo, and I are working on that this week. It's been, posted in a variety of different locations, so that recruitment is still ongoing. So certainly we hope to have a better report by February on that end.
Okay, obviously, we're all disappointed in that, as I'm sure Jay is more than anyone.
Yeah,
But good luck on that. Okay, you're going to talk about,
yep. I'll move on to that next.
Yeah.
We have been, the town administrator and myself have been rewriting the hiring policy, which is quite ancient. I don't think we've reviewed it much since 2003. That's the last time it was approved by the Board of Selectmen. So we're really doing a whole rewrite of that policy. Since it is a policy that was approved at that time by the Board of Selectmen, we're going to bring it to the Board of Selectmen first for their review, and then circle back with the Personnel Board for any additional feedback. So we are hoping to get that on a Selectmen's agenda, if not next week, then their first meeting in February for sure.
okay. Any comments? No? All right, moving on.
Also, we met recently with Attorney Fedorov, our new labor attorney, and I have suggested to her, as well as this board, that we find a time for her to come and spend a little bit of time with you, talking about her view of the world when it comes to the work of the Personnel Board and labor relations, etc. So if the board's agreeable, I could invite her to the February meeting or another meeting of your choosing.
Yeah, I mean, February makes sense to me, but do others have any other thoughts?
Makes sense.
Great, so we will extend that invitation to her today.
Great. Okay, there's nothing else. Thank you, Vanessa. Moving on to old business, benefits review. And let me start by saying, before I turn it over to Jason, since town meeting is not going to be happening in March, and we, as far as I know, do not yet have a date for when it will be happening, it looks like we'll have more time to deal with this item as well as other items we're going to talk about later in terms of revisions to the SAP than we thought. So there's a little less time pressure, which from our perspective, I think will be a good thing. But at that, I'll turn it over, Jason, to you.
All right, thank you. So as everyone was aware, coming out of the last meeting, we had agreed that we would speak with Labor Council to understand just the basics of what can and can't be changed and how difficult things can and can't be changed within Section 11. This came out of the referral from the advisory committee, obviously last year. I had a discussion, Mark and Vanessa were also on the line for that with Kate Fedorov earlier this week. I was very impressed, just full disclosure, with her ability to answer and articulate questions. I'm not an attorney, but really understand what we were potentially looking at and put it in layperson's terms of what you can and can't do. So I hope that relationship continues well into the future, and I think the board will be very impressed when she does come in February. We focused on a few areas, and what I would like to do, probably going to be easiest to have Section 11 handy, but I will try to summarize. What I would prefer we do here today is, for each of these items, have the board say, yes, I'd like to investigate further based on Kate's feedback, or I'm all set, let's keep the language. If we decide on the former, where we say we'd like to investigate further, I think that would give Ms. Jasinski and myself our marching orders of what we would need to summarize based on the comparative data that was garnered from our comparable communities, so that we could then come back with a recommendation for the board to consider and, think through how to implement a change if we were going to make to any of these sections. And I think what you're going to find, the general theme is with a lot of these things, any changes prospectively are really not an issue. It's just going to be about hiring practices and trying to find top talent and making sure that our benefits are, on the higher end to attract that talent. Obviously, there will be some things that you can't do retroactively, or you would have some sort of phase-in period to it. So that's going to be kind of the theme of what we talked about. So does that work for everyone?
Yep.
Okay. So we focused on a few main sections. First is section 11, part B, number 1, which was the vacation accrual chart, which basically, and mainly, this was confirmatory that if we were to increase any of these bands, that really is probably it's more of a policy decision. Nothing with labor, law would impact that. And she confirmed that. So I think what I would propose, Ms. Jasinski and I study is whether 2 weeks is the appropriate starting point for someone with 0 to 5 years of tenure, based on at least what I've seen in my limited time period on the board of exceptions being granted for 3 weeks for most employees, because we seem to be finding people with good relevant background that's meeting the exception down below, and then whether that should have a cascading effect on the folks with 5, 10, and 15 years of experience. So really not a legal question, more of a policy discussion of, does the board want us to analyze this chart and make sure it's fit for purpose for the current environment?
Anyway, for me, the answer is yes. Obviously, I want to know where we stand vis-a-vis other communities on that, and whether there's a benefit to retaining the 2 weeks to the extent we might be hiring someone right out of high school or so. And I don't know how often that happens, but I think the answer is yes. I would be open to that as long as the data supports that that's what we need to do to be competitive and get good people. Others? Anyone else?
I agree.
I agree, Barry.
That's probably the easiest one. So the next was on B3, primarily on the sentence that says an employee shall be permitted to carry over to the following year 1 year's worth of earned vacation. So if you recall, this was as part of the advisory referral, this was the main area of focus, that if you have someone that has the ability to accrue 4 weeks, they actually can have 8 weeks on the books at any one time. If they have 5 weeks, they can have 10. If they have 6 weeks, they can have 12, which, because this is considered a wage, it has to be paid out if someone leaves. Even if we terminate them for the most unjust sort of behavior, they still have to actually be paid out upon their termination from the town, regardless of the reason. So this is the most difficult topic. Obviously, if we were to decide to change the amount that could be carried from year to year, doing it prospectively is clearly the path of least resistance from a legal perspective. But whatever someone has on the books at the time of any change, that's going to be basically frozen and subject to this guideline, because it is an earned benefit at this point. So that answer candidly did not surprised me. It was what was I was exactly expecting. So the question I think for the board is whether we want to study what other towns are doing in terms of carryover. And before I maybe, send it back to the chair to prompt the members, I would say, I would remind everyone of the fact that right now within this town, we have department heads that basically carry no more than 1 week into future periods unless they are tied to the personnel plan in their contract. We have unions that really don't carry much into the following year, if anything. There's a few carve-out exceptions. Everyone's a little different. This is actually probably on the more generous side right now, if you kind of compare those 3 groups just within town. So the other thing is obviously equity amongst all. We obviously don't control department head contracts. We don't control union contracts, but we do have what I would call a pretty large inconsistency just within our own town, not to mention when we study other towns, I don't know what we're going to find because I've only done limited research to date. So I'll pause. And Barry, if you want to do around the horn on this one.
Yeah, anyone want to comment on that? I think it's worth looking at. I do recall from Mr. Norris's memo on this that they made the statement that although they hadn't done a survey, they thought that the accrual of 1 year's vacation was the norm. But I did not get the sense from that memo that they'd actually spent any time looking at that. So I think it's certainly worth the effort in looking at what other towns are doing and seeing where we fit in on that. And I certainly also agree that what we're doing internally is relevant to this. So I would be in favor of going forward with that. Anyone else?
Yeah, just as a comment, and it's just my own personal opinion and background in business, that I feel vacation time should be used in the period that it's granted, not carried forward. And that's just my own personal opinion.
Okay. Dorianne?
I think we should study it and take a look at what other towns are doing. I kind of agree with Dave a little bit, but I wouldn't mind them carrying a year because of circumstances of COVID. Oh God. I think we should study it and take a look at it and make an educated decision.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, I think we have a consensus on that.
Yes. So then we focused on C2, which relates to sick leave. Focused on 2 areas. One is the ability to accrue 120 sick days, the days being the key there. Whether, right, studying that to make sure that that still is the right number. In obviously, I think this town does not have short-term disability plans for our employees, as I understand it. But I know in private industry in particular, that is a common area to limit the exposure. So, right, just thinking about whether 120 is the right number. As you can tell, it hasn't been looked at since 2007. So quite a bit of time, but also focusing on this payout of 20% and whether that still is the right thing to be doing. Sick time is very different than vacation time. And this is what coming directly from Attorney Fedorov is this is not a earned benefit. And I think at least what I've seen in private practice and candidly in other municipalities, sick time is not paid out. Again, this is something you'd want to be careful of from an employee morale perspective and think about going prospectively. But really the question is whether we should look at that clause intertwined with the 120 sick days.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's hard for me to understand what the rationale is for paying out any amount of sick days when someone leaves. That's certainly not what sick days are intended to do. They're intended to make sure people are not in poverty when they get sick, but they're not supposed to, as far as I've ever understood them, provide any extra benefit when someone leaves. So I certainly am open to that, but anyone else? Dave, Dorian?
I agree with your comments 100%, Barry.
I agree as well, Barry.
Okay.
So that is all we talked about with Attorney Fedorov. The other thing I would just like to mention under section 11 is the holiday listing. I did not talk about this with her, but I think, Barry, it ties into future topics we have on the agenda here today. Is I'm not sure if this is a fact or not, but I think most towns have now adopted Juneteenth as a holiday. I don't know if that's a state holiday yet or not, but whether we should be looking at that as a community or not, I guess is the question I would have. Is that a personnel board item, or Mark, is that a select board item?
That's a very good question, Mr. Purple.
I think it's a little bit of both, but I think that selectmen would appreciate guidance coming from personnel board. And Ms. Hill can correct me, but I believe that Juneteenth is now also a state holiday as well as a federal holiday.
I'm pretty sure that's the case as of this year. It was not recognized across the state last year, but we can just double check that with Attorney Fedorov.
Is it worth, and do we have the ability to check what other towns are doing? And I assume this would also impact your collective bargaining as well.
It will be something that would have to be collectively bargained, yes.
But my thought is, obviously, if we say for SAP employees, it's a holiday, you're going to be hard pressed to say to union people that you're not willing to give them that holiday.
You're not wrong.
And in the school, in Mark, the schools had to just probably deal with this because it's now a school holiday for the first time this year as well, based on that. So I don't know how the school committee dealt with it with collective bargaining, but obviously that's the biggest union in town.
Yeah, I'm not sure how the schools dealt with it either, but I do know that usually the SAP sets the table for a lot of those items. And then, the union contracts end up following suit, at the next opportunity.
All right, well, then I think we should be doing some due diligence, A, to establish, yes, it's definitely a state holiday. B, if we can find out if there are other towns who have made it a holiday for town employees, and maybe at our next meeting, we'll have further information. And I don't know if there's anything else, any other information people would want, so we can make a more informed decision on that. But I think it's a valid issue to raise and something we should be thinking about.
Well, Barry,
Yeah,
there was a note from Jim Hegarty that it is a state holiday.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank
Yeah, I'm
you.
hard pressed to ignore if it really is a federal and a state holiday. I'm hard pressed to not take action.
Yeah, I can't think of any other holiday that falls in that category that would not also be a municipal holiday.
I agree.
Okay, let's think about that and put it on the agenda for our next meeting. Anything else, Jason?
I'm good. Thank you for the time.
Okay, well, thank you for doing all that work, and I regret, again, missing the call with Attorney Fedorov. Okay, item B, you recall that we have seen the document that's at date 7 several times before. This latest document reflects revisions that I made based on the discussions we had at our last meeting. The minor one being removing Vanessa's name and putting in her job title. But the more significant ones were revisions to paragraph C, external comps at the bottom, to reflect a couple of things. One, that we wanted to make sure that there was a joint effort in gathering information from other towns about what they were paying. And secondly, that making sure that the information we got related to not just similar job titles, but similar jobs. So we were comparing apples to apples, and I tried to revise C to reflect those 2 points. But I'm, again, open to any further comments people have as to how we can improve this document to make any of those points or any other points more clear. So with that, I would open it up to any comments from any of the board members.
I think it's great as written, and would just suggest that as you go through new positions here in the future, that we solicit the opinion of those that are relying on the guidance to see if there's anything that could have been clearer.
Okay.
I agree.
Thank
It
you,
looks good to me.
Jason. Dorianne?
I agree as well.
All right, then we should, do I hear a motion to adopt the guidance for requesting a new position in the SAP as presented?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay. I got nervous there. Take a roll call vote. Mr. Nixon,
Aye.
Mr. Malinowski,
Aye.
Ms. Jazinski,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. The guidance is adopted. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item C, the salary tables. And for me, there are 2 pieces to this. There's the immediate piece of what do we want to do for fiscal year 23 in terms of revisions to the salary table, and then the issue of the salary study for a more long-term analysis of what we want to do. As for the first part, you have in your packages at dates, looks like 7 and 8, Mr. Bannister, thank you, went to the trouble of revising the table to show what they would look like with a 3% shift, which we did not adopt at the last meeting, but we talked about. So just to give board members an idea of what those tables would look like, both for full-time and part-time employees, if we were to go to a 3% shift for fiscal year 23. So I guess we need to discuss, do we want to make a change for 23? And if so, what change do we want to make? So I will open the floor for discussion on that question. Anyone?
Mary,
I
do
would,
you want to change the table, the current one, and then just make a new table with the 3% increase that we had agreed upon? Is that what you're,
Well, I say that again, so I understand your question.
you want us to use this to reflect this new chart with the 3% increase that we voted on for pay raises?
Well, no, I mean, it's separate. We could not do anything on the tables and let the 3% pay increase stand in theory, and we've done that in the past. The issue becomes, and I think, I know Brian's here, that you were going to look at this, whether there would be anyone who's going to bump into the maxes if we didn't do anything with the table, but stuck with the 3% increase for employees for 2023. And Brian, is there anyone who would hit the maxes?
No, there's no new ones. There's a couple that are getting a little close, but it wouldn't impact anyone being restricted.
Okay, thank you. So theoretically, we could leave the tables for this year, for 2023, as is, and no one would be harmed by that. They would still be eligible for the 3% salary increase.
I don't see a downside of just changing the table to add the 3% and make that change going forward.
I agree.
And an increase, there's no reason to not change our current tables to reflect the changes we've made, because we're going to end up, where next year, we're going to be behind. So I would prefer just making the change now and going forward with it.
I think the only, and it's probably theoretical impact, is if you were to hire someone with no experience, then their starting rate would be 3% higher than it would be if we left the tables the same. I think that would be the only relevant impact.
But that's such a minor amount,
Yeah.
Barry, and it affects so many other people than just one possible person. I just think we should make the change in the tables. That's
Yeah,
my,
I'm not disagreeing. I just wanted to be clear that it could theoretically have an impact, but I agree it would be minor, and I agree it seems to me very rarely are hiring people at the minimum these days. So I don't see that as a practical problem. But anyone else want to comment?
I'll just second everything Dorian said, and also second what you just said is we're not hiring people at the minimum anymore, it seems. Which is a good thing, means we're getting people with experience.
I agree.
Okay. So I would therefore entertain a motion to essentially adopt the salary tables as presented in Bates 7 and 8, with the 3% shift as shown for fiscal year 23.
so moved.
Second,
Second. Okay, we'll take a roll call. Mr. Nixon,
aye.
Mr. Malinowski,
Aye.
Ms. Jazinski,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. And so those tables are adopted. Thank you.
So Barry, on that, is there a reason why we are not looking at Schedule D and adjusting that by 3% as well? Or should we ask the fire chief his opinion on that? And then I think you said recreation's coming forward with something next meeting, but I would think their table, I guess it somewhat aligns with what we just did on the part-time, but it sounds like they're gonna be making some edits.
I mean, I think D is different. It seems to me, my argument would be they're more affected by the 3% annual increase than they are by the salary table. I'm sorry, Vanessa, you wanted to comment?
I just wanted to chime in for one moment. The Schedule D chart was just revised very recently. So I don't believe Chief Achilles was looking to change that in FY23, perhaps in a couple of years.
Yeah, to me, it's different, and I would look for the chief to come forward when he thinks it's no longer equitable. But I don't see it as sort of working the way that these salary tables work. To me, it's more in line with if employees across the board are getting a 3% increase, then the chief might say, well, I want my people to get that increase as well. But
I think we should-
go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, I think we just should be clear with him that we have not adopted a change to that, just so that there's no miscommunication, and that he knows he either has to bring something forward for personnel board to examine this. I know it was just examined for the first time in 15 years last year, so I hear Vanessa's point, but everyone else and every other part-time employee just got adjusted theoretically with their chart. So I just want to make sure we're being transparent with that part of the process.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the other difference is all the other people who were adjusted, I think, I might be wrong. Maybe not. I was going to say the other people are not exempted from the performance evaluation piece, whereas the people in Schedule D are pretty much. But this to me, I have no problem with advising the chief that we are adjusting these tables and asking him if he thinks he needs to do something similar for Schedule D. I have no problem with that.
And my other question on that, Barry, was just, I know we pay federal minimum wage, but are we gonna look at some point really just lining up with Massachusetts? I get we follow federal, but to be paying people 11, 12, 13 even, which is still dollars under minimum wage, I don't know, I just feel like we're behind the times there. Again, it's a small population of employees, but I would just ask the board to consider that in the future.
Yeah, I think the problem is that if you were to jump, make a significant jump in the starting, that it affects the whole table. So then it could have a domino effect on, you don't know what the total cost of that would be. It's something you'd have to, obviously we'd have to look at to make sure that we weren't ending up costing the town a huge amount of money to do it. But I don't know that it would, but that would worry me a little bit. But I certainly take your point that I don't think we're hiring anyone at $11 an hour, or we're gonna have a hard time finding anybody who's gonna work for $11 an hour today. But obviously the reality is we talked about, we tend to hire at the midpoint or certainly not at the bottom end of the range as it is. So in reality, but I think as part of the salary study, the sort of second part we're going to talk about, I think that's a piece of it. That what do we, what's that? Where should the bottom of the range be in light of what the minimum wages are at the state and federal level? So that leads to the second part of the discussion on the salary survey. And in talking to Mark and Vanessa about this, we have some concerns about what we sort of roughed out at our meeting last time about sort of doing that all internally. The data collection is part of that, and I think we're all comfortable that that's something we can do internally in terms of going to the comparable towns and getting the raw data. What concerns us is our ability internally and frankly, the lack of expertise we have internally in analyzing the data. And what we were thinking of was perhaps we can find money in the budget, recognizing that while there are categories within the budget, at the end of the day, there's some fungibility in it, so that even though money might be set aside for one area, if we don't spend it in that area, we could use it to possibly retain someone with expertise so that we don't end up spending whatever it is, 30,000 on that, because we're not asking to do the whole thing, but we might for 5 or something more than that, get someone with expertise to do the analysis piece of it. And I guess I would feel more comfortable with that. And frankly, I don't know whether it's realistic for the amount of money we might have available, but to see what we could find in terms of people with expertise to do the analysis piece of it. So I'd be interested in what other people on the board think about that approach.
Do we have any idea of what the cost would be?
I'd open it, Vanessa. I don't know whether you've had an opportunity to gather any information as yet.
No, not at this time. We have not done that piece yet. We wanted to see what the board was comfortable with, and that relative to narrowing the scope of what we would pay a consultant to do. So we were waiting until after this discussion to do it. I will say that in the budget that is proposed for the personnel board next year, there is $5,000 for consulting services. So, you know, we didn't really have anything else planned for next year besides this for that line item. So there is at least that much funding available.
Right, and we don't know how much we'll spend next year on tuition reimbursement or employee development, or, you know, those are unknown. So we really at this point don't know how much we would have to spend. Any
No,
other?
we're not supposed to be using, like, if we have money left over from tuition, we're not supposed to use that for something else. I mean, employee development and consultation, we might be able to use that, but we can't just take whatever's left over and use it to hire a consultant. That's, my understanding is that's all supposed to go back to the general fund if we don't use it for the purpose it was intended. I may be wrong. but that
There's a
was-
financial policy that the town has that Mark and Brian can probably speak to if you're going to start cross-pollinating lines based on that are not in line with their original purpose, there's typically a notification to the select board, I think at this point, in Carla, to kind of get consensus around it before it's done. Which is newer, if I remember, right? A year or so old.
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
Okay, and thank you for that, Jason. This last time we talked about this, I don't mean last meeting, but maybe more than a year ago, sort of an issue like this came up and we got different information. So I was unaware of that, but that's good to know. But for me, that almost says to me that we need to push the salary study off to fiscal 24, because speaking for myself, I'm not comfortable that we can internally do this in a way that we're not trained to do this. There are people who have expertise in this. There's a reason why we pay them money, like we pay lawyers and doctors, because they're trained to do this. We don't have anyone internally who has that expertise. And yeah, we could all sit down and gather the data and say, it looks like we should be here, but I wouldn't feel comfortable with that. That's just me. But I'm open to what others have to say.
I think the first thing we need to do, Barry, is find out who does that type of work and find out what the cost would be. I mean,
Yeah.
otherwise speculating on it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. We can find someone for $5,000. I'm open to that. So I think it's a worthwhile exercise to see if there's someone who we could get. Vanessa?
I did want to mention to the board that we have not spent anything so far this year out of the consulting line in the FY22 budget. So if this is something you wanted to bridge over this fiscal year and next fiscal year, you would have, approximately $10,000 to combine it together. Although the second 5,000 isn't available until July 1st.
It requires a town meeting vote.
Right, assuming our full budget passes.
Yeah, and it's sort of like hiring someone and telling them that town meeting has to, we're hiring you now, but town meeting may not approve a new position, and so you may be out of work. I mean, it's sort of the same thing. I mean, I think it's highly unlikely, given how small our budget is and how little money we're talking about here in the general scheme of things. I think the risk is pretty low that our $5,000 is going to get stricken from the budget at town meeting, but I suppose it could happen.
I like Dave's approach. I agree. We don't have anyone internally to do this, right? And let's just do it right. I like Dave's approach. Let's try to get an idea of how much this really is all in. And then I think it's easier to then talk about strategy of whether you bridge 2 fiscal years. But Barry, just to confirm, you said FY24. FY24 meaning that's when it would be effective, correct?
Right.
Or FY24, that's when you would actually have the consulting budget to do it. I just wanted to confirm what you meant by FY24.
No, and it gets confusing and I get confused. I mean, if we're going to bridge the 2 years, we'd spend the money we have left this year before July 1 and then spend what we have after July 1 of this year.
Okay.
So, okay. Dorian, did you want to add anything or? Okay. Then I think we're agreed, Vanessa, if you could see what you can find out about what we could potentially get for $10,000. And then report back at the next meeting and we'll, report back as soon as possible on that. Because I was going to get to when the next meeting will be, but we can put that off.
Okay,
Barry,
we'll do.
let's not lead with we have 10,000. Let's lead with what are our options, and let's get a menu of what we can get, because these
Exactly.
vendors are very
We don't
good.
discuss that with vendors.
Yeah.
We don't
making
tell them
sure.
how much money we have.
Yeah.
We
Agreed.
should.
Get the
Agreed.
quote first.
Agreed. Anything else on salary tables? Okay, let's move on. I know we have a lot of people waiting. So let's move on to new business. First, we have a request from the Board of Health to classify a new position, and I will give the floor to Ms. Malinowski and say goodbye to Mr. Malinowski.
Yeah, so Barry, maybe I should just explain. I'm planning to recuse myself from this discussion, given that my wife is the chair of the Board of Health, and while I don't believe it would violate any state conflict of interest, I think it's in the interest of transparency that I recuse myself from this discussion in the eventual grading of the position. So I'll ask Vanessa to move me out of the room and I'll rejoin you whenever you're done with Chelsea.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Welcome,
Good morning.
welcome.
Thank you for having, I'm going to say me, but it may be us. I'm just looking to see if I have a quorum. I do not, but I may have one soon, so I'll keep an eye on the attendee list. So thank you for having me. I know Ms. West is in the audience as well, in the event that you have any questions specific to her job description. She's available to answer any of those. So I did provide a memo to you as well as an updated job description. And just, I think it's pretty self-explanatory on what we're looking to do, but just to give you any context for the public, I think you're pretty well aware of kind of how we got to where we are today. About a year ago, we were looking to hire a full-time nurse, and there is no full-time nurse position currently in the SAP. We just have a part-time nurse. So that position was brought in on contract. And the Board of Health has brought in Labor Council to discuss the difference between an SAP employee and a contract employee, both in open session and executive session, so that the Board of Health could make an educated decision on the path forward for the staff, and making sure that we have sustainable funding and process within our department. So the board unanimously voted to redo the nurse job description, include all of the roles and responsibilities that the current employee is doing or we're hoping to do in the near future, and bring that forward for your independent review.
Okay, thank you. Questions, comments from the board? I have a couple of questions and maybe some little bit of a wording change. So looking at the job description on page 1, the second bullet point under essential job functions, I found that a little confusing. The last part on the next to the last line, it says reporting to that state on administration. What does that mean? What is that? Wouldn't it
Oh, it
just
should
mean-
say to the state. It should say to the state. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Um,
If it says that, does that make more sense?
yes,
Okay,
yes, that
I'll
clarifies.
update that. Thank you.
And just in terms of wording, I had a suggested wording change just for clarification. Let me run it by you. So I think it would be clear if it said coordinates and conducts regional and local health-related clinics as needed, such as for flu and COVID vaccines, and then comma, including, and then just goes on from there.
Okay, so take out regionally and locally.
Well, put it, say coordinates and conducts regional and local health-related
Okay. Okay,
as needed. And then after vaccines, instead of having a period there, just put a comma and make it including.
okay,
Just a clarification, just as suggested.
thank you.
And the question I had in terms of grading, and this just reflects my own ignorance. So in terms of education for this position, can you reach the required qualification through an associate's degree and then other training, or is a bachelor's degree necessary? Just, I don't know, I'm just asking the question.
So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask Taylor to come over to answer that question. I would say that it should be a bachelor required, but she knows more of the courses that are available if you were to get an associate's, and then any training on top of that.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for having me. So the answer to this question is kind of, you can't really answer it. It's more about what as a board you would want the qualifications to be. But based on experience and, we had decided that we wanted at least, what did we say, Chelsea? Did we decide on 5 years
Five.
experience?
5 years, yeah.
Yeah.
So most hospitals now require a bachelor's degree to even walk through the door. And so to get that experience, you would have to have a bachelor's degree. So I think that would answer the question. You would have to have a bachelor's degree to be able to do this job.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And Barry, I don't want to stop you midstream, but I do have a quorum now. So if you don't mind, I'd like to just call my meeting to order and bring Dr. Medina over.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Vanessa, do you mind bringing Dr. Medina over? Thank you. And I'm going to call the Board of Health meeting to order at 10:01 a.m. on January 12th, 2022. Myself, Chelsea Malinowski, and Dr. Medina are present. Thank you.
Okay, and we do welcome all of the members of the Board of Health to, I think is going to be a very brief discussion. Are there any other comments, questions from the board on the job description? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the job description for the Nurse Assistant Health Director Outreach Coordinator position in the Department of Health. Is there such a motion?
Go move.
Second?
Second.
Okay, we'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Nixon,
Aye.
Ms. Jasinski,
Aye.
the chair votes aye, and I note for the record, Mr. Malinowski has recused himself from this vote. So the job description is approved. The next step is for the board to grade the job, and we will be doing that for our next meeting, which is tentatively scheduled for January 26th, at which time we would approve the job grade and place it in the, propose to place it in the SAP.
Okay.
We have a new member of our committee. Welcome. And we thank the Board of Health for all their work on this. I know it's been a long and somewhat arduous process to get here. We think this is a good step forward, and we look forward to working with you on this in the future. And we
Thank you.
for your
Thank you very much. Do you need, do you want me to update those suggestions that you made? And are you okay if Safdar and I just vote on those minor changes so that it's final from our end?
Yeah, I think that would make sense for you to do that.
Okay.
The change is so minor, it doesn't change the substance at all. So I
Okay.
consider our vote to have included any such change, minor technical change like that. I don't
Okay.
think we need to revote it, but I think
Okay.
it makes sense for your board to approve it in the new form.
Okay, so Safdar, did you hear all Barry's suggestions? They were just minor.
I did not get to hear those.
Okay, then you know what, Barry, I'll add this to my Tuesday meeting and we'll revote it, but I'll send it to you and with those updates in the meantime.
Okay, great.
Thank you
Anything
all for
else?
your time.
Okay, thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So I'm going to adjourn the Board of Health meeting at 10:04 a.m. Do I have a second?
I second and vote aye.
And Malinowski's aye. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thanks, Taylor.
Okay, next up, the library, Mr. Donovan. And you can, obviously, Jason needs to come back in.
Good morning.
Morning, Mr. Donovan. Thank you for joining us. We do have a memo from you on what you'd like to do, but why don't you just briefly give us your reasoning on this?
Well, so this was actually, because I think in the past I've come before you to create a lot of new positions. And there was something actually that Mr. Malinowski said a long time ago, which is it feels like new positions are always being created, but you're not looking kind of at the old positions and if they still work, right? So what we did was we wanted to hire somebody when we had a retirement last fall for a certain job function. And in an existing job description, we found that the requirements were all there, right? But it wasn't titled what we wanted it to be titled. So the library trustees discussed this issue, and what they decided was to hire the person under sort of, I guess, the defunct title. And then we'd like to request that for the SAP update at town meeting, that the position be changed. So this was all communicated to the employee that we hired. They're aware that they were hired as a children's librarian and that we were going to petition you to change it to youth services. So a lot of this is the changing role of the job function. We now have a teen space at the library. This job helps both the children's room and effectively sort of staffs the teen space and runs teen programs. So that's really sort of the background. I don't know if there are any specific questions you guys have. I know the memo kind of details, that the library trustees voted this already and gives you sort of the details on that end.
Any questions for Mr. Donovan?
So the only change we're going to see in this is a title for the position, but not grading or costs, just the name of the position.
No, and Barry had asked me about the changing the job description. So I think we'd like to long-term look at all of the job descriptions. The piece of feedback I can give you that came from the library trustees was none of the actual job functions were any concern or there were any questions about. What specifically was raised by one of our board members was the education requirements, because for some reason, this job description was passed with a requirement for 2 master's degrees. And I didn't write it. I can't tell you why that was. So our candidate that we hired actually does have 2 master's degrees, but I don't know if we would ever find somebody like that again who would accept it for the salary that we offered. So that, I guess that's my point of feedback. I would say long-term, we would probably look at updating the educational requirements specifically. So that's the only thing. But I think with the existing job description, we have a person in that job who meets those educational requirements and is doing the functions within the description.
Okay, thank you, Ryan.
Any other questions?
No.
Seeing none, this is one of the less controversial things we have to do, but I will entertain a motion to change the title of the position in the library from children's librarian to youth services librarian. Do I have such a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, take a roll call vote. Mr. Nixon,
Aye.
Mr. Jazinski,
Aye.
Mr. Malinowski,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. It is approved. Thank you, Ryan. And Ryan, you will stick around for the last item on the agenda.
Yes. Thank you. I never set out to be controversial, just for the record. So I appreciate.
We appreciate that, and we'll remember it next time you come before us to change some job descriptions. All right. Now to move on to Mr. Haggerty and a change that he's seeking for a pay rate in the town clerk's office.
Yep, I'll move him right over.
Hello.
Good morning, Mr. Hegarty. Why, and we've all obviously seen your memo. Is there anything you want to add to that to explain what you're asking?
No, it's very straightforward. Mrs. Battle has agreed just to help fill the position temporarily while we look for people outside. We did not have very unusual from our prior searches. We did not find anyone that I would want to bring in here, and her situation changed. She agreed to assume the position on a full-time, on a permanent part-time basis. Essentially, this will be job sharing. She will work less than the 19.5-hour positions. And we have a second person that we will probably bring in March. They have some personal issues that they're preclude them from joining at this time, but very happy to bring her on. And she does a terrific job here, and I'd like to keep her here on a permanent basis. The midpoint is what we traditionally hired people at in this position. So that's why I asked that you set the salary at that rate.
Okay, questions? Mr. Zinsky, you're muted.
Yes, I'm sorry. I have twin boys over here in the background. Mr. Hegarty, I just have one question. Mrs. Battles is a very integral part of the warden positioning and running of the elections for you. Are we going to be paying her at the rate she's working the elections now, or is it suggested that with this new position, this is what she'll be getting paid to work the elections?
She would continue in her role as an election warden, and which is fulfilling that role should be paid at the election warden rate, which is substantially less.
So those hours would remain the same in addition to this part-time position in your office now at a different rate of pay. So she'll be getting two different rates of pay for two different positions. Okay,
That's correct, yes.
Thank you for the clarification. I appreciate it.
Any other questions?
Mine's just a procedural one. Is I thought, I guess while I appreciate the transparency that Jim usually provides, I was confused why this is even requires our vote if it's at the midpoint, and maybe it's just an educational for me. I know Jim is the appointing authority, but I didn't even know why this required our action. So I don't know if anyone knows the answer to that.
Yeah, straightforward. The SAP says that as the appointing authority, I can hire somebody at the low end of the salary range, and anything above that up to the midpoint requires the approval of the personnel director or the personnel board. I always go to the personnel board because I'm independent, and honestly, I'm going to come back to you with a memo about your SAP adjustments on this. I just think it's that all elected boards should go through the personnel board, not through the Board of Selectmen's office to approve a hiring rate.
Well,
So that's why it's this way.
Well, but this is not, I mean, she's an existing employee, correct?
Right.
So she's moving from one position to another. So for me, this falls under 8A, transfers and promotions, which just says you disagree.
I do, because she's remaining in the same position as a part-time administrative position. We're just changing the rate of pay. So she was hired in September through all the regular procedures we would follow, physical, all that other good stuff. So she's continuing in the same job description, same evaluation and everything else. You're just strictly changing the pay scale, pay rate.
Well, then I am confused. So, I mean, so you're saying it's the same job description you're saying that she was working under previously. Then what you're really saying is you want us to give her a raise.
Effectively, yeah. So I have two choices. Because when we look to hire somebody, I needed somebody in a hurry because we parted way with somebody quickly in September. All right, now, not to get into this in a public setting, but we parted way with somebody quickly. And I needed somebody to step in to fill the gap while we started looking online to hire somebody. So Mrs. Battles agreed to fill that position immediately, just on a temporary basis. So I have the authority to hire somebody at the minimum. So I hired her immediately just as a stopgap measure. It was only intended for her to be here for a couple of months until we could fill the position. And then she would have left. So my alternatives were, we'll have her resign and then reapply and come before you to hire her at the midpoint. So it's really kind of an apples and oranges. She's just something almost like a temporary. Now she's going to be, hopefully with us for many years to come. So had we anticipated that she was going to stay here as a permanent part-time employee, I would have hired her at that midpoint, which is what we've traditionally done. It was just for an issue of expediency to help us get through the fall.
Okay, so, and at the end of the day, I don't think it matters sort of where specifically in the SAP, I think we end up in the same place, because even if it's a transfer promotion, the department head makes a recommendation, we approve it. So it doesn't really matter. I'm just trying to understand the process here. So she was a temporary part-time employee previously. And are you saying that temporary employment ended and you're now would like to hire her for this continuous?
Effectively, that's what's happening. Effectively, that's what's happening. I mean, I haven't asked her to give me a letter of resignation and then to give her a new letter saying I'm hiring you, but that's what it is.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, at the end of the day, I think we could fit it in a couple of places in the SAP.
Okay.
Either way, we get to the same place, but I think it is appropriate for Jim, you to come before us, ask for us to sort of put our imprimatur on,
Yes.
on this. I think it's the right way to do it. So
Thank you.
any other questions for Jim? Okay, I would entertain a motion to set the pay rate for Miss Battles at $22.38.
So moved.
Moved in second, take a roll call vote. Mr. Nixon,
Aye.
Mr. Malinowski,
Aye.
Ms. Jazinski,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. It is approved. Thank
Thank you
you,
very much.
and good luck with that.
Have a good day.
You too. Okay, now we move on to what could be a lengthy discussion on SAP revisions. And I should say, as I think I alluded to earlier, we scheduled the January 26th meeting, believing that we were going to be under some time pressure to get the proposed revisions done in time to be included in the warrant. The timing of that appears to have changed so that, and I'll turn to Mr. Purple. Is there a date change certain yet for when the revisions to the SAP need to be done in time to be included in town warrant, in the warrant for town meeting?
So the last discussion with the Board of Selectmen, which included the town clerk, the moderator, was that, and the Board of Health, was looking at preferably an outdoor setting. So that shifted the looking at the dates, hopefully somewhere between the end of April and say the third week, end of May, somewhere in that range. And we're trying to do some outreach, try to get a sense of, what date works, because, you start to get into, graduations and all of the things that, that the spring and, brings with it. So it just becomes more difficult to find a date. You get into sports schedules for the kids. So we're looking at that right now. It was going to be that, we need to have something locked up, for article sponsors, probably, close to the end of February, at latest. The selectmen need to be finalizing that warrant beginning of March. It may get you another 2 or 3 weeks, so it could be closer to the end of March, third week of March, by the time everything needs to be back in and have a chance to have it reviewed.
Okay. Thank you. And I bring it up just when we get to our calendar, we may talk about whether we need to have the meeting on January 26th or not. But we can talk about that when we get to calendar. So you have in your packet a couple of documents. You've got a marked up SAP, which reflects the change to 7A that was previously approved by the board, as well as some other proposed changes. There's the wording change that we don't really have to concern ourselves with, changing Board of Selectmen to Select Board. And there is some other substantive changes that have been proposed by Mr. Purple, Mr. Bannister, that we'll talk about, as well as propose further revision to 7A that I've suggested. But why don't we go through the marked up version of the document, which starts at dates 19, and go through them in order. Maybe that's the most efficient way to do it. The first one is just the change of the date on page 1. I assume that's non-controversial. The next ones are in section 7. And the first one, which is proposed by Mr. Purple, is really just to conform to a policy that we previously approved on salary increases. And I think it's pretty self-explanatory in the first paragraph of 7A. Does anyone have any comments on that? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the language that we've been previously dealing with in the third paragraph of 7A. And you saw the memo that I prepared on this, and the two issues that I realized that I had with it. And anyone have comments on that piece of it? Again, I think I believe the omission of the last sentence was inadvertent. I don't think we ever had a discussion about taking that out, that, you know, we essentially need to approve any salary change. And I don't know why we want to give up that. And the other piece was just to clarify that because of the policy we adopted, there are some employees who are not subject to the performance evaluation requirement. So those are the reasons for the two changes I suggested. But I'm open, obviously, to any discussion about that. Okay, seeing none, let's move on. Oh, I do think, oh, well, there are changes to what were sections B and C. So I guess, Mark, you've suggested removing B and C in their entirety, I guess, due to the other changes we made. Was that the rationale for that?
Yeah, just for consistency.
I think we still have, if we took those out entirely, we really have nothing addressing the people who are not covered by the other things we've done. So I was going to suggest putting in the following language. and I'm not wedded to this, but it struck me there was sort of a vacuum for those people. And I would suggest something, and I apologize for this not being included because it just struck me as I was going through this yesterday. But I would say something like non-continuous part-time employees and employees in positions under Schedule D shall be eligible for consideration for salary increases upon recommendation of the appropriate department manager or board and approval of the personnel board. And let me read that again. So non-continuous part-time employees, because they are exempted under the language of 7A, which says every employee that is continuous, full-time or part-time. So I say non-continuous part-time employees and employees in positions under Schedule D shall be eligible for consideration for a salary increase upon recommendation of the appropriate department manager or board and approval of the personnel board. Does that make sense to people?
Makes sense to me, Barry.
And I think we need a mechanism for, people who are not covered by the rest to get salary increases. So this would attempt to do that. So I put that in, I guess, as 7B, the new 7B. And I should say, because I think I want people to have opportunity to digest all that, my suggestion would be to, at our next meeting, have another markup of this that would contain all the changes we're sort of by consensus approving, but not formally approving at this meeting. So we'd have a format we could approve an entire revised SAP at our next meeting. That's how I propose that we proceed. So I don't want anybody to feel they're committing to any change at this meeting. We're just sort of nodding our heads and saying, yes, that makes sense. And then at the next meeting, we'll have a document that contains all the changes and we can vote yay or nay on any of them at that time. Okay, moving forward. And again, obviously, there may well be changes we're going to talk about to vacation pay and sick leave. One we didn't talk about is section, I guess it's 11B5. And this struck me again as I was rereading Mr. Norris's memo on changes to vacation pay or sick pay. So recommendation he made that I think we pretty much have to make, and that's in section 5. It now says in the event of termination employee other than for cause, we need to take out the other than for cause language because, and again, not speaking as a lawyer, former lawyer, but pursuant to Mr. Norris's comments, we cannot deny someone accrued vacation because we terminate them for cause. So we need to take that language, the other than for cause language out. Anyone have any comments about that? I don't think we really have a choice on that.
Well, it's also consistent with what Attorney Fedorov told us earlier this week, so.
Right.
Completely agree.
Yep.
And Barry, in that section, it's gonna be easier to have a markup, and I'll get it to Vanessa, is we did, as we were talking to Attorney Fedorov, denote some inconsistencies with references to sick leave that we'll call out. It doesn't change anything, it just, there's conflicting wording in there that I think everyone knows what it means, but I'll I'll send those along for the next meeting for consideration.
Yeah, I do recall that it says you can't get any sick leave benefit at termination, and then it provides for 20% at
Yeah,
termination.
which is at retirement. So it's just
At
their,
retirement, right,
yeah.
yeah, that's one that I recall, but yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
Are we also looking to add Juneteenth possibly to this SAP version for the next town meeting?
Possibly,
Might be another
Yeah.
change that we were
Yeah.
proposing.
yeah,
Okay.
as I said, there are going to be several changes on the vacation and sick benefits that obviously we don't have before us now that we'll talk about. And we may need another meeting to finalize that. We'll see how it goes, but yeah, those are sort of open items. Next, we go to, I think, section 13, and these are changes proposed by Mr. Purple and I think Mr. Bannister, so I will turn it over to Mr. Purple, I guess, to explain what they're trying to accomplish here.
Actually, I'll turn it over to Miss Hale for this piece.
Okay, sorry about my video, but I'm here. So in section 13, we wanted to rewrite this area because sometimes there can be a conflict if if a department has a need for a part-time employee to work full-time hours in a temporary capacity. Right now, they're not required to go through the town administrator or the finance department to make sure that there's funding, number one, to do that, and there aren't any other financial impacts. So we just wanted to add another level of approval here, which is why we wrote in personnel director and finance director with notification to the personnel board. Since the personnel board doesn't have authority over department budgets, we thought the personnel director and the finance director should have a role in a situation like this.
Okay, so as it's written now, we have approval authority. And what you're suggesting is that the personnel director and finance director would have approval authority and would notify the board. Is that-
Correct.
Okay. Open up for discussion. People have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have one thought, and I just want to bring it up simply because I think that when Mr. Hegarty was in here earlier, he was, discussing the issue. So I'll tap dance around it. When it comes to the authority of independent or elected boards or departments, and whether or not, and then having the town administrator or the personnel director, or in this case, the finance director, involved in those decisions, that there's got to be some way to address it. And that's one of the things, personnel board, trying to find a way to do it. I'm not sure where to go with this. I'm just highlighting it, that I think that, putting that language in is important to try to have put some controls in place to ensure the money is there to do these things, and ensure that there's at least, some authorization, some notification that these things are happening, so that we understand them and we can deal with any issues that may arise because of it. But again, I think there may be some pushback on this language, similar to what Mr. Hegarty alluded to earlier, when he was here discussing his other issue.
Okay, and I see, and this could be done a number of different ways. Another way to do it, and I'm not fighting to keep authority with the personnel board, but that's not the issue. But it could be that they have to provide prior notification to the personnel director and the finance director, so that if it came to the personnel board, you would be able to say, it would have this financial impact, and therefore we don't think the personnel board should authorize it. I mean, that's another.
Yeah, and I think notification versus authorization may take away the issue.
That's what I'm thinking. It may be less of a sting for, maybe
Right.
less contentious that way.
Right.
So that would work for you to do it that way, that they have to give prior notification to you and to Brian or whoever may be.
Yeah, I prefer to have authorization, but yes, I think that's a more, in principle, yes, in practice, authorization works.
How do other members of the board feel?
I believe we need some type of protection to make sure that we don't have part-time employees who work under their department head and they end up working too many hours to where there's a possibility it could cost the town thousands of dollars where they end up with full-time benefits. And I think that's what we're looking to protect here. Barry, I understand your point of view on this. I believe that would probably be the best step to take to start us off and see if that works. And if it doesn't, then go to Mark's suggestion. But to me, it's not important who has the authority. It's to make sure that the town is protected, that we don't make some part-time employee a full-time person because they work too many hours and then it costs thousands of dollars for benefits. That's my concern.
Anyone else?
Well,
Jason?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think you start with the word notification, right? We start to, but I think there's an equity issue here too, right? To make sure that one board or committee isn't maybe doing things that are inconsistent with another board or committee that has appointing authority. So I do like the idea of having consistency to the extent possible, but also respecting that we have a structure in place where we definitely have multiple elected officials and boards that do have certain responsibilities and authorizations just under whether it be statute or town bylaw. But I think Dorian's point is also well taken in terms of this is about creating a liability potentially for the town in terms of making sure that the benefits are accruing appropriately or not appropriately, and making sure that we're doing all things consistently. So I do think that anything we can do to encourage collaboration as opposed to silos is the best answer for all of us as taxpayers, but also in fairness to the employee, making sure that they are getting what they are rightfully owed.
Yeah, I think the real concern here that has been echoed a couple of times is really on the part of Mr. Ballantyne. We run our benefits budget pretty tight. I know that he does carry some additional health benefit plans because there are things that happen during the year. There are changes, in lifestyles for our personal changes for employees that require we have to have additional plans available that we didn't really foresee, but we don't carry as much as we used to. That budget runs very tight. So if something happens and a part-time position all of a sudden becomes full-time eligible, that puts us in the position of potentially having to find money that we don't have. And it trickles downhill to the reserve fund or trying to shuffle budgets around and everything. And it is better just to at least have a heads up of what's going on so we can at least provide some level of guidance as to whether we see this as being an issue or this is something that we could absorb.
Okay. Anyone else? And before I go further, let me apologize to you, Brian. I was talking to someone yesterday about Roger Bannister. I think I've been calling you Mr. Bannister the whole meeting.
I've been called worse, so that's okay.
I apologize for that.
It's all right.
Okay, so if we said something like, due to exigent circumstances or for longer, subject to prior notification to the personnel director and finance director and approval by the personnel board. Would that Would that work? I mean, we're not approving language here anyway, but something along those lines. That's what I would suggest.
We just have to make sure we protect the town from
Yeah.
somehow somebody not watching the hours a part-time employee is putting in, doing extra work, and then somehow the town is put in a position with a huge liability financially. I can't imagine that a department head would purposefully do that. But, you know, things happen and we just have to protect the taxpayers, that's all. So however we have to word it, we have to word it.
Well, and I'm comfortable that this board, if Mark and Brian come to us and say, this is going to cause a financial problem for the town, I'm comfortable that this board is going to say, no, we're not going to do that. So let me, go ahead, Dave. You were going to say
No,
something?
I agree with what you said. I think that we tend to err on the side of caution.
Yeah, I think all of us, although we have no clear role in the budget process or spending money, we do in a broader sense, but not in a sense, we all take seriously the fact that decisions we make do have an impact and are cognizant of that. So I think for the reasons we talked about earlier, that at least as a starting point, the best way to handle it is require people to let Mark and Brian know what they're going to do. And then Mark and Brian will take seriously their obligation to let us know if something that's being proposed is going to have an adverse impact on the town. And then, you know, we can decide that. And if we, in practice, learn that it's not working that way, that Brian and Mark really need to be able to say no at the outset, and we can change that.
Yeah, I know you're not looking to give personnel board any more work, but I think that in the decentralized way that we govern and that, you know, that we're set up in this structure, personnel board is the one thing that cuts across all, you know, appointing, elected. So, you know, not to give you more work, but again, you know, you seem to hold the keys to the car for, you know, for all of those things, regardless of your appointing status. So there may be some instances where it rests more with this board to get to the consistency level that I can't remember if it was Ms. Jasinski or Mr. Malinowski that mentioned the consistency issue.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, that's on us. You know, that's part of our job to make sure that that's being done. And so B would be sort of the same thing. We'd structure it the same way, I think, without going through all the discussion again. If someone's asking for additional compensation, obviously we want to know that Brian is comfortable with that. And so Brian's going to tell us if someone says they want to pay this person as if they're a full-time employee, and Brian's going to say, we don't want to do that for this reason. So I think we'd structure it the same way unless people feel differently. Any other discussion on this? Okay, moving ahead to 16F. And this is really for our benefit and the fact we don't comply with it as it's written. Changes to the classification schedule are supposed to be made 6 months before town meeting. I don't think, at least the time I've been on the board, we've never met that requirement. So this would change it to 3 months, which we might have a shot at complying with. Any
So-
discussion on this, Jason?
Yeah, so I just know from participating and talking with other boards and committees, our change from 2.8% to 3%, the timing of that was awful. Like, just to be completely honest with you, for obviously not a huge change. Obviously, it was favorable to the employees. I don't think any employee was arguing with it. But basically, all the departments, I think, had submitted their budgets and then had to resubmit because everyone, even those with union employees, have SAP employees as well. So there's no way it's going to be 3 months before and actually be helpful to Brian and Mark. So what I would propose maybe is a friendly amendment to this and not ring fencing us to a date or a month ahead of time, but just say in collaboration with the town finance budget cycle or something along those lines, the personnel board shall vote a annual adjustment prior to the date that initial department budgets are due to, I don't know, Brian, if it's to you or to the town finance team. That way we set an initial rate. And then if conditions like this year require an adjustment, like let's just say we went from 2.8% to 5% for some reason, we can always, it doesn't say we can't adjust it after that date, but I think we should take a vote prior to the budgets going in because I just can't imagine having to have redone however many budgets you have, Brian, for a 0.2% change like we had.
Let me ask a question. Why does there need to be a date in here at all?
So I don't think there does. Historically, there just has been. One of the reasons that we wanted to rewrite this particular section was when the town moved town meeting up to March. Although it was only a difference of a few weeks, it shifts everything earlier in the year. And historically, this board, put a lot of dependence on the salary I would do for other comparable communities and what they were proposing to give to non-union employees. So it's impossible for us to get that information 6 months ahead of time. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to change this. I think Mr. Malinowski's rewrite of that particular area would be excellent to tie it to the town finance team in the budget cycle. I just want to explain why we were looking to change it, that 6 months is difficult to get comparable data.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, because this is really a limitation on us. And we have sort of the conflicting pressures of the point Jason made, that people need this information to make budgets, with Vanessa's problem that other towns haven't set theirs yet, so she can't get comparable data. But I'm just, why are we sort of twisting ourselves in knots with having any kind of deadline in here? Why don't we give ourselves the flexibility to do it when we think it needs to be done? I mean, who is this date serving? I guess is my question.
I guess that's what I thought I was accomplishing with my language, is that we would make a preliminary recommendation based on whatever data we have as a placeholder. It could be zero, Barry. Like, right? Like if we don't have the right data, we just say budget zero, everyone across the board. And then when we have the right data, so, Vanessa's gone out and done surveys, et cetera, it doesn't preclude us from voting a new number once we have complete data. But I think it kind of puts the ball in our court of at least signaling where we're at the time initial budgets are due, and then outlining a process to get to a final number if we're not confident that we had the right data when we made the initial action.
Yeah, I'm not sort of arguing against your language. I don't have a problem with it. I'm just wondering, what is the benefit to us of having any date in here and any time constraint in here? Who
Because-
benefit? That's what
Because
I
you're basically creating a situation where either Brian or Mark are gonna set the rate on our behalf, or you're gonna have individual departments using different numbers that they think is appropriate for the budget cycle. So it allows for a consistent application to all employees that are subject to the SAP.
But what would be, we know what we have to do, and we know what the time pressures, whether it's set, I mean, it said 6 months here for years, and we've never done 6 months. So we're sort of we know what we need to do. So putting language in here that says that, for me at least, and again, I'm always, doesn't accomplish much except potentially put a limitation, not give a later board some freedom because of changed circumstances to do things differently. That's all I'm saying. I'm just saying that I don't understand what the need is to put any date or any time schedule in there, because we know what we have to do.
So maybe it's simpler to simply articulate that it's, that it's your responsibility to do it. I mean, if you were to ask Mr. Ballantyne, he would probably tell you it'd be great for him to know in September, October, before we send out, the notice to the departments of what we like to see from them in their budget, so that we don't have to, I think, as Mr. Malinowski had said, go back and touch these budgets, 2 and 3 times because we're changing percentages all the way through, for consistency. But we don't have that information in September and October. So it's a little bit of a moot point. And because we've moved the schedule up, so now town meeting is in March, it makes it that much more difficult to try to hone in on a number any earlier than right around now. So
I think what I would do is just, for sake of ease, is take Jason's tack and not assign a date. And then, again, with Jason's suggestion, go with a 0%, because a 0 is really easy to figure, right? That no one has to really do any work. So when they finally get a percentage, they only really have to do it once. We do have to still swap papers, but it's a lot easier than in the past. What we've done is set, I think what someone said is an arbitrary rate, and then we've adjusted that. So that's, maybe we could avoid that and make it a little more efficient.
yeah, I think that's better. That way there's a little more consistency.
Okay. All right, fine. Jason, why don't you draft it and get it to Vanessa, and she'll include it in the document we see at our next meeting.
Okay, but I think, Barry, what Mark and Brian just said, if we're gonna go with a 0 in and around budget time, actually will accomplish, because it won't put us on the clock in October-ish time frame. It'll just say at some point prior to town meeting, is I think where I'm gonna go with the language, if Brian and Mark are okay with that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm good with it. I think your responsibilities, like Barry said, it's, that we have to have that number by town meeting, so. And we'll make the.
Just to be careful with that, we need it by town meeting. We need it by the time the warrant goes to print and the budget is finalized.
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, it already says that, whatever we do has to be approved at the next town meeting. So I don't know what more we have to say, I guess. But anyway.
I'm sure the language, Mr. Malinowski, will come forward, will reflect that. Yeah.
Okay. I think the next one is section 18. And again, this was proposed by Vanessa and Mark. Do you just want to explain what you're trying to accomplish here?
Sure, I'll do that. we just wanted to make this section a little bit more concise. It just seemed to be a little bit wordy. I think because it still says, you know, the plan may be amended in the same manner that any bylaw would be amended. You know, we're not precluding anyone from coming to the personnel board during the course of the year and make suggestions. Is, you know, it's anything relative to the SAP, except of course for a citizen petition, would be presented to the personnel board during the course of their discussions to amend the plan. So, you know, this was just our effort to, you know, shorten that paragraph a little bit, make it a little bit more concise.
Comments from anyone?
I like the change. I like the shortness, short to the point.
I agree.
Okay, and so when you say acted upon, that would mean that if someone came with a petition and we didn't like it, that would, and voted against it, the person would still be able to get it in the town warrant, assuming they met all the other requirements for getting in the warrant.
Or they could make that, yeah, they could look to make a motion to amend on the floor as well. So, which is a lot easier to do than trying to do a separate article, but sure, both ways.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we all understand we're not precluding someone from getting something in the town warrant just because we don't favor it. Okay, understood. I guess everyone is on board with that, look like. Okay, and then the rest obviously looks like we'll be adding a position in Schedule A, the nurse position. And I should have said, Dorianne, will you do grading? I've tentatively done it. I think Vanessa has, but if you could grade the job description.
I will do that with Vanessa. Okay, Vanessa?
Yes, of course.
Perfect. Okay, we'll get it done for the next meeting.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
And again, there may be other changes here. We may do something on the rec commission, and I may be missing something, but I think that pretty well covers the changes we want to consider for including in the town warrant that we will be discussing at our next meeting. Anything else on revisions to the SAP? Seeing nothing, we will move on to the final item on our agenda, tuition reimbursement. Is Vanessa, is Ms. Townsley? available?
She is not, but Mr. Donovan is here. I'll bring him back over.
Okay.
Hi, guys. I'm actually walking to Amy now, so we'll go on the meeting together.
Okay.
Hi, guys. She's coming over right now.
Okay.
But if you want to get started, we can both hear you at this point.
Okay, let me ask a question first. So it says the course is asynchronous. I assume that means that she can watch the classes when she wants, that she's not doing it as part of, you know, she doesn't have to be there at 9 a.m. on Monday.
Yeah, it's not like a class that you it's not like a video class to watch, but she can log in and do the work at a real pace. Yeah, I'm getting a thumbs up.
Okay. Questions from the board?
Is this a graded course?
It is.
Thank you, Ryan.
You're welcome.
I had two questions. One is for probably Vanessa. Is this the only tuition reimbursement request you received before 12/31?
Yes, it is. And I did send out a reminder shortly before the deadline, just in case it was the Christmas week, in case it slipped anyone's mind, and I did not hear back from any other employee.
Okay, and then my second question is, I think procedural, and I don't know who the right person answered is just in looking at the form, at the top, it says to be completed by applicant prior to taking course. Yet it then talks about a course in the fall of 21, in the spring of 22. So are we being asked to potentially approve a course that started August, September, so retroactively, and then a course that's prospectively? Is that what's on the table?
Right? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Vanessa.
I think you're right on that, Mr. Malinowski. One of the quirky things, I think, with the way that this policy is written is that the deadline isn't till the end of December. So the personnel board in the past hasn't generally talked about these situations throughout the year. So, but I think you're correct in your assessment.
Yeah, and I was trying to remember if we have approved one sort of retroactively. I mean, it's difficult for the employees to know by December of one year what course they might want to take in the fall of the following year. So it's hard. And I don't know if any of the other members can remember, or maybe Vanessa can remember, whether we have approved one retroactively or not.
I don't recall specifically right now, but I will definitely go back and look through our records today.
Well, I just want to pull out the policy quickly and see what we say in the policy. Okay, if I can find it.
I looked at it and it was somewhat silent
Okay.
on it, unless I missed something.
I have it open if you'd like me to share my screen, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, hang on one second. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yeah, looking at 3D. For the fiscal year for which the courses are to be taken.
So both of these would be within FY22 because one she just completed in the fall session.
Right.
I mean, I
Yeah.
guess I ask all of this, right? Because I don't think we're more to clean up our process moving forward. I didn't know if there was any precedent about the past in looking back, but I guess just based on that title at the top of the form that we received in our packet, I would have thought we would have gotten two requests. One, in and around the time the policy was sent out by Ms. Rosenblum in the late summer, early fall, for the one course, and then I would have thought we would have gotten a supplemental follow-up for the spring course. So basically have considered this on 2 different dates. I think that's the way to work around the different semesters and notification, and as opposed to, just for the future. I don't know where I land on doing something retroactively, and kind of wanted to understand the precedent of the board, which doesn't seem there is any.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. And I think, and I don't know if you were here for a lot, well, I don't think you were on the board for a lot of discussion. We struggled mightily with the deadline date because there's no good date to choose, and yet we have to sort of know at some point, because we want to know how to allocate the funds that we have. And so that presents a problem in itself. So it strikes me that, much as it pains me to say this, we need to revisit the policy and possibly revise the form depending upon what we decide on the policy. I think, from the employee's position, it would have been difficult to know how to do this properly, because you see the deadline and say, okay, last December, I didn't know what I was going to do, and I could have submitted something before the course, before I took the course, but seems as long as I get in by the deadline, I can see where there would be at least confusion in employees' minds in this situation.
I completely agree, and I do not fault the employee at all on that. So I'm ready to motion it with the caveat that we look at crispening up the policy moving forward to make it clearer to the employees. But
any other comments before we move the motion?
If it's okay, if I just say one thing.
Sure.
Part of the confusion, Mr. Malinowski, might have been caused by me, because my understanding in the past with talking with Mrs. Rosenblum was that this was sort of looked at as on an annual basis. So I think I told her to kind of apply with that in mind. So I'll take the hit on this, might be my fault. So I'm sorry.
there's no one to take a hit.
Yeah.
I think we have a job to do now.
Yeah, it's certainly not clear from the policy. And so I don't fault anyone for this. I don't think there's any fault to be placed. If there's fault, it's on us on not having thought this through more and being more clear in the policy. So I'll blame Ms. Rosenblum for that.
Miss Townsley was very transparent. She discussed entering the program with me prior to applying. And so I want to say that she did everything right, at least on my end with what I advised her to do. So.
Okay. Any other comment from the board? Nope. I will entertain a motion. Mr. Malinowski, you were going to make a motion.
I'll move that the personnel board accept the tuition reimbursement request as presented in the packet, with the understanding that we will revisit our policies for next year related to the reporting of classes both prospectively and retroactively.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, take a roll call. Mr. Nixon,
Aye.
Mr. Jasinski. You're muted.
Aye.
Mr. Malinowski.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. It's unanimous. Congratulations and good luck in the courses. Thank you. Okay, we now move on to, and thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
We now move on to the board calendar. As I said earlier, I think it's an open question now whether we need to meet on the 26th. It seems, at least appears to me, we have adequate time, given the new schedule, to get this done at our February meeting. And even if we don't then, we would have flexibility to have another meeting if we needed to, or maybe even the March meeting would be timely. So, but I'm open to what others think. Anyone?
I think if it still works for calendars, let's just get our work done. And I'm sure Mark would appreciate having one warrant article fully written. So,
Okay,
okay, continue with what you had already proposed.
okay. Anyone else have thoughts?
I'm good with whatever you want to do.
Okay, Dave?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay, then let's keep with the January 26th at 9 a.m. Date, and let's plan at that meeting. Let's just do SAP revision at that meeting and hold off the other items we've talked, tuition reimbursement, those other things. We can do those in the normal course, I think. So hopefully it won't be a 2-hour meeting on the 26th. That would be my goal anyway. So if that's agreeable to anyone, is there any other business to come before the board?
No.
Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second,
All in favor, Mr. Nixon,
Aye.
Mr. Zinsky,
aye.
Mr. Malinowski,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thanks for your patience with my little guys for the meeting.
Stay well, everybody.
Bye.
Take care. Have fun, Dorian.
Thanks, I will.